everyone, and welcome to Cat TV. Today we are interviewing and asking questions of Mr. Drew Totten. And Drew is a family friend of mine. I've known him ever since, probably I was 12 years old and moved to Arlington. Drew's family owned a drugstore where Cullinan's store is or was. And it was really neat because there was a soda fountain in there, and got to know Drew and his mom and dad and his brother, and we all sort of grew up together. And so now Drew is a registered nurse at the hospital here in Bennington. He's an advanced EMT instructor. He's a nursing educator, and he's a retired Vermont State Medical Examiner or death investigator. Perhaps you've seen him around with his Quincy Vermont State tags on his car.
Sometimes.
So Drew's here today to talk about alcohol abuse and communities at risk. And from time to time, he will be coming back with other shows for Cat TV, and we are really so excited to have him here. And Drew, welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So talk to us a little bit and tell us how you got to be where you are with the nursing and the medical examiner and all that sort of good stuff.
Sure. I started in EMS in 1977. So I retired. I basically had about 30 plus years in. I've been an ER nurse, so some people may recognize me from there. And I became a medical examiner in 1998, just retiring last year. And so I've seen, certainly, today we're going to be talking about alcohol. I've certainly seen a whole host of occurrences that have affected people's lives relative to traffic accidents and alcohol overdoses and alcohol poisoning and those types of things. So I'm hoping that at the end of our time today that our viewers will get an appreciation of not only how large the problem is, but how it can affect a community.
Okay, great. So today we are choosing this topic to get the word out and to educate people on it. Okay.
So just to give you a little bit of history, I created a program for our nurses and our clinical staff at SVMC a few months ago to assist our staff with the proper information and the proper handling of patients who come into our health system who in fact may not even realize that they may have an alcohol problem. They may come in for some surgery, they may come in for a pneumonia or something along those lines, and so somewhat an unrelated type of of illness, and when they get admitted, they may well be somewhere within a 24 to 48 hour period. They may start feeling unusual, and unusual in the way that they may become restless, they may become fearful, they may get shaky, those types of things. And sometimes that happens because the patient may not recognize the fact that if they do consume a fair amount of alcohol, which they may or may not actually even realize, that being away from it for a few days while they're in the hospital can affect them significantly. So in fact they can start to withdraw, and it's important for not only the patient and the community to get a sense of what that's about, but also our nursing staff, because they're actually taking care of our patients.
Now you mentioned several different symptoms. Usually like on TV when we're watching a show or something and somebody starts to withdraw from alcohol, they're like sweating and they're like jittery and stuff. But you're also saying that they can be fearful.
Yes, yeah. As a matter of fact, they can feel extremely restless and fearful because they don't really know what's going on. They didn't get admitted for that reason. It's kind of an after effect of what can happen sometimes, and so if the person hasn't really recognized that maybe they are drinking to excess, these symptoms can happen without them really even anticipating them. And so they can have nausea, they can have vomiting, they can be very shaky, they can just generally be very much not themselves and may not understand why. And that's why generally our staff will then, if it hasn't already been addressed, will collaborate with their physician and try to dig a little deeper as to exactly what's going on.
Oh, good. So your staff would make the call and try to get somebody else involved with the treatment of the patient.
Absolutely.
Good.
And when they are admitted, that it is a screening question. But I will say that not all people are totally honest about that.
Right, right.
And because of that, they may minimize that.
Yep.
And part of the reason why, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, is that alcoholism in general is a very quiet disease.
Okay.
It isn't something that, well, to give you an example, if someone were to, you have your family over for Thanksgiving and you just got diagnosed with high blood pressure, for example. I mean, it would be nothing to talk about that, and that your doctor put you on medication and all these other, all these other things. But alcoholism is a very, very quiet disease. There's not many people who are waving the flag about, "Hi, I'm an alcoholic."
Yeah.
And there's lots of reasons. There's lots of reasons why, particularly because many people are may not have totally recognized the severity of that illness, and then in other cases there may be they may actually be minimizing it.
Right, right. Wow. Well, we are going to discuss a myriad of topics today, and so let's get started and see what kinds of questions we can come up with and your answers. Okay.
Okay, fine.
Great. Okay. So let's start with the total effects on the body of alcohol.
Well, alcohol is a central nervous system depressant.
Okay.
Unlike what people assume, because they feel a kind of a high when alcohol is introduced. But the fact of the matter is, alcohol is a drug, and it's a very potent drug. It increases. The other problem with it is it increases the actions and of many other drugs. So people who are on medications, for example, this can intensify significantly
Really? Okay.
some of the other things that they're taking. And plus, it also increases their risk of injury.
Okay.
Despite the fact that it gives you a nice warm feeling sometimes when you have an alcoholic drink, the fact is it actually depresses your system.
Okay.
And many people may not realize that. So.
Yeah. Because there's always this little warning on your prescription bottle, like don't take alcohol with this medication because, or don't operate machinery until you find out what the effects of the alcohol.
Exactly.
And a lot of people, will just take it and say, well, maybe it'll boost the strength of my medication and make me feel better faster or something like that.
Not usually.
No,
Not usually.
So, okay,
Yeah.
great.
It usually has the reverse effect of that. So.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the scope of the alcohol problem in the United States, and what can you elaborate on that?
Well, I've done a fair amount of research about this, and I think I'll just back up for a second because part of what the programs that I provide our clinical staff is to the ALCA program that I created was to help educate our staff not only for their care that they provide their patient, but just in a general sense of how large the problem is. Currently, 3 in 10 Americans drink at levels that are harmful.
Really?
And 1 in 4 people either abuse or either are abusers of alcohol or are dependent on it. And the data in 2012 showed that there's nearly 18 million people who are abusers. 68% of people actually drink alcohol in the U.S., so it's a fairly large percentage. But there are 88,000 people die from alcohol-related issues every year.
Wow.
And there are about 700,000 people that are in treatment nationally. So it's a big problem.
Now, are we talking about just adults, or are we throwing teenagers and younger children into this mix too?
Teenagers are absolutely part of the mix. There's significant data to show that if a teenager should start drinking before age 15, that he or she is 4 times more likely to have a drinking problem than if they waited until age 21.
Really? Really? Wow. Wow. So are there certain limits that people should observe regarding alcohol?
There are. As a matter of fact, the Institute of Health has suggested that for men, it's no more than 4 drinks per day or 14 drinks in a week, and for women 3 drinks a day and 7 in a week.
Wow. Okay.
And so, again, there are some of the problems with this is that there are people, a large percentage of people who are binge drinkers, who may not necessarily be alcoholics, but do drink a lot. And a recent study that I read showed that the average binge involves about 8 drinks. And we're talking about a large number of drinks in a short span of time, at one occasion, and that the majority of the people affected were in their late 30s to early 60s.
Wow.
So while teenagers make up a fairly large percentage of binge drinkers, the adult bingers was pretty remarkable.
Wow.
In not only the number of drinks, but also, and it seemed as though that was within a month period. So one could correlate the fact that if you were doing this 4 times a month, that maybe it's every Friday, or maybe it's every Saturday.
Well, that was, I was leading into that question, like say, I work all week long and, thank God it's Friday, TGIF, and I'm going to go out with some friends. What happens if every Friday night, I just want to shake off the work week and go out to a local bar or to a restaurant or something like that and, have 6 or 8 or 10 drinks with my friends? I mean, is this binge drinking or am I an alcoholic because I do it every Friday night?
Well, again, I think what people need to realize is that there are people who abuse alcohol, and there are people who are chemically dependent on it. So, if that is your pattern, and if you drink 8 or 10 drinks every Friday, and don't drink any other time, then you would pretty much fit the criteria of an abuser. However, if that continued, and sometimes it does, where people now they're doing different things. So instead of bringing just going out and drinking on the weekends, now they're bringing the alcohol home, and now they're drinking every night. Those kinds of things, those can make a big difference. And again, there are very specific guidelines that are set up for an abuser. So, for example, an abuser is a person who continues to drink. And has which affects his family life, his job, his occupation, and also gets them in legal trouble. You talked about operating heavy machinery, driving while intoxicated, for example. I mean, so that may just be a person who is an abuser. Now, an abuser might be able to, with counseling from his family, from his physician, may be able to, it might be pointed out in a discussion that, you know what, you're really drinking more than you should be. Let's look at that. And that abuser may, in fact, cut down or may stop entirely. An alcoholic can't do that. An alcoholic can't stop with 1 drink. And I think the reason is, and this is very well supported, is that an alcoholic builds up tolerance. And so it takes more to get the same effect. And there's a profound effect on their work life, their relationships, and that sort of thing. So they're vastly different. And a person who is truly dependent, chemically dependent, will need detox. So sometimes the counseling will help, but generally speaking, they would need to go to a facility until they're totally dry, and then be able to get into a counseling program that would be able to help them from the long term.
I was going to say, like, monitor them or have them rely upon it, like, on a daily basis, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, and the thing is, for most alcoholics, their choices are only 2. It's either a choice to drink or a choice to stay sober. And it's a lifelong predisposition with alcohol. They are chemically dependent to the point where the brain and their nervous system is now conditioned well enough, and it's really a chemical dependency. So the fallacy that many people have about alcoholism is the fact that it's just a willpower issue. They can quit if they want to. And the reality of that is this alcohol is as powerful as heroin or any other type of addictive substance. There's a high correlation in families. So for example, if one adult, one parent in your family is alcoholic, you run a risk of 25%.
Really?
If both your parents are alcoholic, it's 50%. And it tends to also be higher on the male end than the female end. Because men tend to be a little bit more, take more risks anyway, nationally.
Yep. And you have, like the women, like especially if they're stay-at-home moms or something, they have the stresses of the children and everything, and it's like, while the child's laying down, sure, I could have a glass of wine or a martini or something, who's going to know?
Right.
Now, you also mentioned, like, it affects their job performance as well. There was something years ago that said that if a person went out and drank their lunch, they could get away with eating peanut butter, and the boss wouldn't know when they came back. But I mean, some people do go out and drink their lunch and then go back to work.
They do. I think that the truth is that oftentimes people who do that, and they do that routinely, are probably kidding themselves that they may well have an alcohol problem, because most alcoholics don't eat. Most alcoholics are profoundly malnourished. And by percentage, there's only about 6% of people who drink, of the numbers that I gave, that are really the Skid Row type alcoholic, which leads me into a discussion that I think is important, and that is people who are highly functional. Highly functional alcoholics oftentimes are good providers. They can be people from all walks of life. They maintain their jobs. They're good parents. They're okay at work, and they often slip under the radar. And oftentimes their family also will help cover for them. And if the person themselves deny it, some of that denial can be supported by their family because they use the same criteria.
Right.
It can't be a problem if I'm functional. If I get up every morning and I go to work and I don't beat my wife and all these other things that are related to it, oftentimes it becomes okay then. And oftentimes they'll say, well, you know what? Yeah, sure, Bob drinks a little bit, but he's an okay guy, and he's under a lot of stress at work, and there's 50 reasons why people continue to do that.
Sure.
But they oftentimes, this will catch up with them because alcoholism is a progressive disease.
It is. It is.
Very much so. And over time, like for example, one thing I didn't preface my initial introduction was that I lost my dad when I was a teenager, and my dad died by his own hand when I was 16. And so alcohol really did affected my life and my home life pretty significantly when I was young. And when I was in nursing school, I did an extensive rotation at the Brattleboro Retreat. I was there for a month working with alcoholics, and predominantly alcoholics and substance abuse. And it's really amazing that much of our problem now starts young.
Right. Right.
And so in the research that I've done for the hospital and for the program that I've created, in substance abuse in rehab facilities, that almost 75% of people in rehab started drinking before age 17.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
30% were in the bracket of 11 to 14, and 10% were under 10 or under.
Wow, really?
So this is very alarming. When again, and I'll use the word kids, your young, children. Remember that their parents, good or bad, are role models. And who they associate with, and so the whole teen pressure, the peer pressure, the fitting in. I mean, it's no different than when you or I were growing up with smoking.
Yep. Yep.
You know, in the 70s, like when we grew up, it was all really, you know, it was really cool, and it was really cool to drink too.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But again, you know, knowing what we know now, you know, and being parents, and you know, and in my case, fortunately a grandparent, it worries me to know what you know, what's happening to our youth today, particularly not only with drugs, but you know, with alcohol, you know, as well.
But, you know, and like you said, growing up in our day and age, I mean, you know, the pajama parties and stuff like that, some of the girls would have an older friend buy them a bottle of wine
Absolutely.
and, you know, some cigarettes, and, you know, they'd party until like 5 o'clock, 5:30 in the morning, and,
Yep.
you know, get really sick, sleep for a couple of hours, and then go take a babysitting course or
Right,
something like
right,
that,
exactly,
you know?
exactly.
So it's the same. Some things never change, only
Right.
it's a different venue now, you know?
Well, I think we, you know, of course, we all can admit we live in different times. But the other thing I wanted to just let people be aware of, if they're not already, is that the alcohol amounts. You know, I know people who just say, "Well, I don't really drink. I just have a wine cooler, or I just have maybe I have a glass of wine, or maybe I have you know, maybe I'll have a beer every now and then." But for the purposes of identifying a problem, a shot of whiskey, a 12-ounce bottle of beer, a glass of wine, wine cooler, it's all the same.
It's all the same.
So it still fits into the range that we've talked about of 4 and 14 and
Yep,
3 and 7. So
Now, like with some of the kids, I'm getting a little off the track here of your questions, but like with some of the children, like you said, 10 and younger, okay? The parents obviously monitor their liquor cabinets. So why aren't they catching? I mean, yes and no, they monitor them, but if they are monitoring the liquor cabinet, why aren't they catching this? Is the 10-year-old that intelligent? Like if I take some water and pour it back in the bottle, mom and dad aren't going to know that I'm using the vodka?
sometimes,
Really?
you know, sometimes the time of getting someone to buy alcohol for you is you know, adults don't really are smart enough these days to probably not go down that road. But if you have a couple friends and all your friends happen to have alcohol, a little bit here and a little bit there,
true.
can really can escape, you know, a parent's view. And you know, it's no different than if they mooched a cigarette or a couple cigarettes, or you know, in the overall scheme of things, they can go a bit undetected.
Yep.
And then there's the other side of that, which, you know, there are parties, and they may get an older person who, you know, who does have is of age to buy, and you know, then we have weekends and keg parties and those types of things.
Yeah.
And this is another area where our teens get into some significant problems because they don't really know when to stop.
Yeah.
And I have had lots of experience in not only investigating deaths of alcohol poisoning among teens, and it's pretty rough stuff to go to, you know, have to stop at a you know, a parent's house and let them know that their child is dead.
Yeah.
And it happens very commonly around the U.S. One situation of one case that I handled here actually in Bennington was a case of a 17-year-old boy who went out with a few friends. They were able to get some alcohol somewhere, and he drank way too much and passed out.
Okay.
And he passed out outside, and his friends were pretty upset because they were fearful. They wanted to, I guess they, wanted to help him, but they were afraid of getting caught. And because of this, they left him under a bush.
Ouch.
And he died.
Oh no.
And he died. And that was a prime example of what binging, and alcohol poisoning, can do. I mean, this young man's life was, snuffed out over some bad decisions by not only himself, but the friends and the company he was keeping at that point, who were clearly more worried about themselves and getting caught.
The ramifications of
Right. Right, and we've all been there to a certain extent. But I would just want to say to the viewers that if you have a child that who calls you and says, I've been at a party and I need a ride, please give them the ride. Please make some arrangements for them to get home with a sober adult. And I say the same things when I lecture to teens, that it's important that you should be able to call any sober adult any time of day or night and deal with the consequence later of whatever the parent may dole out as far as punishment. But they would much rather have you home alive than dead.
Oh yeah.
And and the other problem that teens run into as well is they may get into a car with a person who is significantly impaired, and it's their only ride home, and they're worried about, well, they got to get home. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and I have no other way home. So how do I do this?
Yeah.
Well, they run the risk of getting into a vehicle with someone who once that person is behind the wheel, you are totally at their mercy.
Oh, yeah.
And and this has happened multiple times that I'm aware of, where people who have survived auto accidents have said, I told him to let me out, I told him to slow down, I've told him all these other things. And again, when you have someone who feels they're invincible, which many teens do when they're drunk, this is a problem.
So it can start very innocently, like having a few drinks with their friends and, at a party, and then it just sort of snowballs. Right. And sometimes we as teenagers, or even we as adults, don't realize that all the effects that it can have on you,
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're really tired, if you've had a really strenuous, stressful day, everything is totally different,
Right.
So, Drew, let's talk a little bit about alcoholism, how it differs from alcohol abuse, and are alcohol abuse and alcohol dependence the same?
Well, I think people look at them as words that are interchangeable, but in fact they're not. As I just mentioned, alcohol abuse is the use of the recurrent use of alcohol. And the effects that potentially it can have not only on your life, but on your job and those types of things. Beyond that, the dependence criteria is, as I might have mentioned, is tolerance. That's one of them. So taking more alcohol to get to the same effect.
Okay.
The signs of withdrawal, which is usually tremors, sweating, nausea, vomiting, those types of things. Drinking more than intended. So, for example, you talked about going out to have a drink after work. That person may be the last one there. Everyone else has had their drink, or maybe two. And that person says, well, I'm talking to somebody here, I'll see you later. And you drive by 2 hours later, and that car is still there.
Still there, yeah.
They're unable to cut down or control their use, which means that an alcoholic cannot have one drink. And I think that's one of the important distinctions. There's also increased time in obtaining and recovering and using alcohol. I'll give you an example that happened to me a few months ago. I was going into the Bennington beverage outlet just to get a bottle of soda. And as some people who go there may know, that on Sundays they close at 7 o'clock. And I got in there about 2 minutes to 7. I grabbed a bottle of Coke and came out to my car, and they locked the door right behind me. A person came in with dust flying, banging on the door, and this was a middle-aged gentleman who was, they wouldn't let him in. They were closed. And I hadn't closed my door yet, and he was pretty upset and came to my door and asked me if he could buy any of my alcohol.
Really?
And I could see that he was in a very, very bad way.
Yeah.
A very bad way. And I really did. I felt bad for him. But I held up my bottle of Coke, and unfortunately couldn't help him, couldn't comply. And the other component about dependence is the continued use, despite the fact that it has adverse consequences. And that's one of the reasons why people go into rehab.
Right.
There's a loss of lots of things. It can be a loss of their job. It could be a loss of a spouse. It could be the shattering of a relationship. It could be the loss of their friends. There's just, generally speaking, there's usually a loss that's significant to that person to get them to get to rehab.
Really? Okay.
And some people have different tolerances for what they're willing to, to do.
Sure.
But
sure.
the first criteria is to once they identify that they have an issue, and that's the hardest. That's usually the hardest part, especially if they're functional.
Yeah. Now, this gentleman that approached you at the outlet center,
Right.
Looking for alcohol and stuff. Now, if he weren't able to satisfy his urge for alcohol because the alcohol outlet was closed, the liquor store was closed, is this the type of situation where you hear on TV that they drink aftershave lotion or mouthwash and stuff like that?
They can. My suspicion is he probably made himself got to a bar.
Yeah,
I suspect, because we do have, at that time of night,
Right.
our local bars would have been open.
But you hear about this on TV where
Yeah.
they will drink alcohol or
Right.
The mouthwash.
Right.
And,
Mouthwash has a very, very high, and some cough medicine does as well. NyQuil, for
Okay.
example, is about 70% alcohol. But the downside of all alcohol is not equal. So I had one case, and unfortunately the gentleman died. I took care of him on a rescue call many years ago, and he drank rubbing alcohol.
Oh, wow.
And that's a different kind of alcohol.
Yeah,
and that it actually killed him. So there's that level of desperation, that happens.
Well, that's another thing I was going to ask you. I mean, there's alcohol and there's alcohol, and certainly if they drink some of this mouthwash or rubbing alcohol, as you just alluded to, it can kill people.
Yeah, the mouthwash won't kill them because it's meant, if you do swallow it, it's not going to kill you.
Yeah.
But certainly, when people are desperate, it's. I've known patients who have consumed vanilla extract, or most of those extracts do have a fairly high alcohol content in them. So again, people will do what they need to do. And again, this is not a willpower issue. This is a true chemical dependency, and which is why alcoholics cannot do this generally on their own.
Right. They've got this voice in their head that it's like, you need it, you need it, you need it.
Well,
so.
it's really the chemistry that drives that. There's what's known as a post-acute withdrawal syndrome, which is why alcoholics the relapse rate for alcoholics or for people for true alcoholics is 40 to 75% in the first year.
Wow.
So it's very, very high.
Yeah.
And the reason it's high is because of the syndrome, which is part of it is the brain is well trained into that. It looks for the high because the brain there are neuroreceptors in our brain that try to kind of give us a sense of calm and peace. And alcohol does that initially. It kind of soothes us and those kinds of things, and the brain sort of gets used to that in the face of alcohol, saying, "Oh, okay, this is what happens, and this is what I need." It uses it as another form of sort of a relaxation, and it kind of tricks the brain a little bit. But the data shows that the brain, once it is exposed to lots of alcohol, it never returns to its normal state.
No.
So there's always a little bit of damage there. The other thing that keeps people drinking is are the rituals that go with it. It's kind of like when you smoked with a cup of coffee, and they always went together. Alcohol does that as well with certain people. So when you meet someone who you drink with normally as your drinking buddy, you're going to stand out if you don't have a drink with that buddy.
Person, yeah.
And so there's that piece of it, and then so there are a lot of components that keep people drinking, and particularly keep them relapsing, because alcohol abuse and dependence is a chronically relapsing disease.
Okay.
And it is not within many people's control, and I think that's why there's a significant stigma attached to it. And that it isn't just you could quit if you want to kind of disease. It's a disease not only, as I said, it's a quiet disease, but it's very, very misunderstood.
Yeah. I mean, just some of the facts that we're talking about today and some of, the information that you're giving me, it's like, yes, I've heard some of it before, but I haven't heard it all. And it's like, it's very informative, and I hope that our viewers are finding it this way too. You know, let's talk a little bit more about teenagers and how they can get into trouble with alcohol.
Well, again, as I mentioned, that the a teenager's first drink is at age 12 or dropping. And we talked about some of that can happen by not only them going out and trying to procure the alcohol themselves, but some of it comes from their parents having access in the home. It's happened even at younger ages when, let's say, parents have a party at their home, and there's still partial drinks around the table that are left from the night before.
Right, right.
We know that small toddlers have actually been poisoned because they get into everything,
Right.
going around and finishing people's drinks. Another piece of the data shows that there's 4.7 million youths between age 11 and 17 that are problem drinkers.
Really?
This is a huge number.
Yeah.
And when this is a perfect opportunity, I think, for parents to have to kind of have that conversation, and maybe not exactly in the moment, because remember that if the teen is impaired when they get home or any of that other stuff, it's usually not a time that people are too receptive to having those conversations.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I think nonetheless it's important for parents to know who their children are hanging out with, and what kind of things they're being exposed to.
Okay.
Because as I said, I think it was a hard part of my job going to people's homes to give them news that not only would they never expect, but it's extremely difficult to tolerate. Sure. And I can't personally imagine what that must have felt like.
Yeah. Now, I think I sort of kind of know the answer to this one, but scenario, Johnny and Mary go to church with their mom and dad. And in some religions, there's two different species that are offered at the church service, the bread and the wine. And technically, with the parents' permission, the child can take of the wine because it would be like the blood of Christ.
Correct.
Okay, so is it the separation of church and state that is okay for the child to take ingest the wine at church, as versus parents giving a party and supplying the alcohol for the child and his friends?
Well, I think it's vastly different.
Okay.
Personally, I think it's vastly different because we're talking about a sip of wine on one occasion versus many sips of something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And also, having the party as well is endangering other people.
Okay.
Of whoever throws that party has really no right to be able to do that,
right, to give it
to another person's child. And we know what happens at times. When these things go bad, they go very, very bad.
Very bad, yeah.
So I don't know that there's having a sip. I mean, when you look at other countries, when you look at Italy, for example, there's a lot of wine. They have wine with dinner, almost all the time. Do they have a high alcoholic rate? They're about equal to where we are. But again, if you have the gene, and there's lots of evidence to show that just because you drink to excess does not mean you can't stop, and it doesn't mean you're an alcoholic. And so alcoholism is not what I call a equal opportunity disease. I'm sure the viewers and you and I know people who drink to excess.
Yeah.
But they may be a binge drinker. They may be an abuser. They may not have that chemical dependency. The major difference is that alcoholics, alcohol is an all-consuming part of their life. So, for example, if people come to your house for a party, and you have beer and wine and everything else there, a person who brings their own liquor, one might say, well, they won't have my particular brand. The flip side of that is maybe they won't have enough.
Yeah. Okay.
And so there's another sort of red flag, if you will, that people who are preparing to always make sure there's conveniently alcohol there, because they know they can't go a certain amount of time without a drink. I'll give you an example. I have a friend who is in his early 30s who is an alcoholic. He works in local industry. And as some people know, that the whole thing about an eye opener, maybe that eye opener is in the morning before people start their day. In this particular case, like I say, he's in his early 30s, and his eye opener is his necessary alcohol comes at 4 to 4:30 in the afternoon.
Okay.
He is very functional. He has a family. And what happens is that he is, if he does not get home where there's alcohol, or get to a bar by that 4 to 4:30, he's going to get found out, because he will profoundly have shakes.
Shakes, yeah.
And these aren't shakes that you can just kind of will go unnoticed.
These are like major tremors.
He has these are tremors. So basically every day at around the same time, his body is telling him that he needs the alcohol is the only thing that's going to make these tremors go away.
Right.
And so people who are trying to cut down or trying to quit, if they're truly alcoholic, it's difficult for them to do that based on the brain part that I talked about, but also and which they can't control. And they have to, as one alcoholic told me when I was over with him over in Brattleboro, was, I drink to live and live to drink. Because if I don't drink at least enough to get me out of the shakes, then my cover is going to be blown.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
And that's what has happened with this gentleman. And he and I have talked multiple times, and he's been in rehab many times. And the other danger about which I would like to talk about is rehab and what that's about. What kind of resources are out there for any of the viewers who might be contemplating cutting down or quitting. There are the detox process is generally 5 to 7 days for most people. It is usually in a facility that is able to handle the long term of that. And I would just say that they're usually in it is in an area where there's a lot of other outside influences. So, for example, if you go to the Brattleboro retreat, just as an example, because I would spend a lot of time there, they'll get a physical because they want to look medically at what's going on with the patient, what kind of medications they're on, and those types of things. They will then evaluate them psychologically to make sure that if there are any other forms of mental issues like depression, anxiety, and that's the other thing that I think is worthy of mentioning, is that most alcoholics who even stop drinking need some level of counseling or at least some level of medication management so that they don't relapse. Not only for the medication for the alcohol, but oftentimes these folks are not. Their underlying, if they have any underlying depression or anxiety, those need to be managed as well. Because oftentimes those things are going to keep them drinking.
Right, because you often hear of, I drink to forget,
Exactly.
or if I'm depressed, I drink to put myself into a better situation.
Exactly, exactly. And so, there's, but generally it's a medically managed withdrawal and detox process. As I say, it's roughly 5 to 7 days for most people, and then once they get through that initial withdrawal period and they're medicated to do that, then the rest of the process is really getting them into counseling sessions or group or something that can keep them with peers that understand what's going on and can help support them. Because if a person is trying, if an alcoholic is trying to quit by themselves and they don't have the support system, if they continue to associate with the same people that kept them drinking or don't understand the problem, that it's going to be far more difficult for them to quit. Yeah. It's nearly impossible. It's almost like having a person who smokes and whose spouse or significant other continues to smoke while you're trying to quit in the same house. It's just not going to work.
No.
It's way too difficult. And so, you know, I think part of this is that there are resources out there for people, and just because you drink heavily does not make you an alcoholic. But some of those symptoms that I gave, some of those situations that we talked about, that you know, there's a lot of people in rehab. There's, you know, like I say, nationally there's 700,000 people right now in rehab, and there are a lot of opportunities for people, and whether you call a friend, you speak with your physician, you know, you go to Alcoholics Anonymous. There's Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. There's Students Against Drunk Drivers. There's all sorts of help groups, and there's a lot of help on the internet. So there are resources, but I think the first thing is that the person needs to be ready.
Okay.
And the moment you try to push somebody into it, if anyone on any of the viewers have ever seen, you know, the TV show Intervention, you know, sometimes they go well and sometimes they don't.
They don't, yeah.
They don't.
Now, like here in Bennington, I know we have like the Turning Point front, the store down here on Main Street, and I've heard that, you know, like folks can go there for help with rehab and recovering. Is there a difference between recovering and rehab, or is it all like you've got to do one before you can get to the other?
Well, the first thing that people have to go through is they have to go through that withdrawal process.
Okay.
And so withdrawal is really a short interval.
Okay.
You know, it may be a matter of, like I say, it may be 5 days, 5 to 7 days. I think the real work comes later, and that is the continuing work to stay sober, and that includes being surrounded by people who are supportive,
right?
And maybe through medication management. So, for example, if the patient's in the hospital, there are some drugs that are out there that have been proven to work very, very well for craving. Okay. There's a drug called naltrexone. Naltrexone is a great drug because the patient can take it basically forever, and it will help with craving. Another drug that people may not recognize as being used for that is Chantix.
Oh, this anti-smoking.
The anti-smoking. Okay. Some of the research I've recently done is that Chantix can also help people in alcohol dependence. And then another drug known as Neurontin, which some of the viewers may have heard of, its generic name is gabapentin. It helps with not only the craving, but also the mood. It's kind of a mood stabilizer as well. And so most alcoholics need help, and they may need some help from the pharmacological standpoint. They may need some medicines to kind of tide them over. This is very difficult to try to do by yourself.
Yeah, it sounds.
And because of the relapse rates, it's, you know, there's many things that many battles that have to be fought for people to stay sober, and it's hard. It may be a daily struggle for many, but most would admit that if they have one drink, they're pretty well, you know, pretty well done.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot that really goes into it. Would you say that just for the sake of maybe even reiterating, older folks, like middle-aged folks to elderly folks, versus kids, who has the most problem with alcohol?
I think nationally, the stats show that it is middle-aged. They've had more years to drink, for one thing. The other is that about 15% of elderly men and 12% of women are problem drinkers.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and if you think about it, there are a couple of reasons for that. One is particularly if an elder has lost a child, has lost their spouse, or lost a significant number of their friends, and they drink at home, it's likely for them to abuse alcohol.
Okay.
You know, when you think about the kind of maybe the one drink before dinner, the one drink while I'm making dinner, one drink or two after dinner,
Sure.
they all add up. And if we think about that 3 to 7 for women, and but the truth is that the limit for an elder is one drink per occasion.
Okay.
And you know, and I know probably there's some folks out there that exceed that one drink.
Yes. What is, like, once in a while there's a roadblock, like in the road, and the local police enforcers are there, and it's to bring your awareness to alcoholism and seatbelts and stuff like that. And I got stopped one time up near Daly's on my way home to Arlington, and they stopped me, and of course I was coming from work, and it was like around the holiday season, and I hadn't been drinking, and they just sort of like stop you and say, have you been drinking? It's like, no. And can you tell us what the legal limit is? And I mean, I not really drinking. I mean, once in a while I have a glass of wine at home, but I don't outside. I pulled the wrong numbers out of the air. It's like, and the guy sort of kind of smiled and looked at me, and he said, "You'd be way over the limit." What is the limit?
So the limit, the national limit is 0.08%.
Okay.
And that is milligrams of alcohol per deciliter of blood. I won't get into the math.
Okay.
But so what we do in the hospital is we base that 0.08 would if we drew your blood sample in the hospital, that number would equate to 80 milligrams of alcohol per deciliter.
Okay.
Okay. And so, so when you hear the term, when the person's blood alcohol is 0.24, then it's 3 times the
Where it's
legal
supposed to be.
the legal limit.
Okay.
Okay. Now for teens, Vermont is a no tolerance state. So if you are under age 21 and you even have a wine cooler, if there's any level of alcohol in your blood, you can be charged with a driving while intoxicated.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So there's a zero tolerance there. So, but to answer your question, body weight has a tremendous amount to do with how that alcohol affects you.
Okay, that was my next question. What about body habitus?
Body habitus has a lot to do with it, whether you've eaten or not. Because remember, if you have an empty stomach, it's going to, and it goes into your bloodstream immediately.
Yeah.
And so it has a lot to do with how much you weigh. Also, if you how well rested you are. If you've been up all night and you're tired, or if you partied hardy and you're still at it. I mean, I've taken care of patients whose alcohol levels were, that people wake up at 200 or 300 milligrams.
Wow.
When they wake up. Basically, someone who has an alcohol level of around 500 to 600 in the scale, so that would be 6.0, I guess, if you were to think about, that's fatal. So, but I've known patients that I've taken care of in the past who have been well in the 500s, which is a huge number, and still may not be holding an intelligent conversation, but they're still breathing and they're still talking. So,
okay. How does alcohol affect injuries and death? Like, you'll see someone, have a scotch on the rocks for supper, okay, and all of a sudden, they're walking to their bedroom or something, and their slipper catches, on the grate for the, the vent for the furnace. And they fall down and they bump their head and they bump their nose and maybe even dislocate their shoulder or something. One drink. And you often hear the person say, well, if I had 2 or 3 drinks, maybe I wouldn't have gotten hurt.
Well, there's an old saying that some people may have remember, but it's an old saying that that God protects drunks and little children.
Okay.
I don't know where that really came from. I remember my mother saying it when I was a kid to somebody else. But you know, I mean, that one drink might put someone, could cloud their judgment. You know, I mean, I think 50% of car crashes are alcohol related.
Okay.
More than 80% of fire deaths are alcohol related. 60% of people who drown have alcohol. So, I mean, the stats there are significant relative to injury and death. There's a significant correlation between that, and the national stats and the international stats support that. It's rare to go to a motor vehicle accident. You know, and the other problem that happens is, especially around the summertime, you know, people are out, they got a bonfire and they're swimming or they're doing other things or they're boating. You know, you can get charged with boating while intoxicated.
Right.
You know, so and sometimes there's the thing about alcohol is that it minimizes those inhibitions. You know, and people do things they normally wouldn't do.
Yeah.
And they take risks that they normally wouldn't take. So, as I say, there's a lot of stats to support that injury and sports and alcohol and all that stuff don't mix very well.
Okay, good. Now, what is the cost, like federally and you know, like by states and stuff? The cost of alcohol abuse and dependence are really significant. Is there like a lot of money spent on education to let people know? Or is the money coming from the alcohol producers and sellers? You know, sort of like the cigarette thing from way back.
Right.
You know.
Well, I think some things have changed. For one thing that you don't really see, you know, cigarettes were taken off the TV a long time ago. But I think before we talk about the financial costs are huge, but there are the other costs that are involved are the interpersonal problems, estrangement. You know, people being estranged from their family, from their coworkers. It leads to work-related issues. You know, if you have a significant drinking problem and the next, you have to go to work the next day, it's unlikely that you're going to be on your A game. You know, you may well be hungover. One thing I would say though, that most true alcoholics don't get hangovers like people who abuse do.
Okay.
Because their body's conditioned. They have many years of and volume of alcohol that their body and their brain has gotten pretty well conditioned to that. The other costs are there's an increased risk of domestic violence, of medical problems, cancer of the liver, pancreatitis, hypertension, heart disease. There are just so many other medical costs, and that this does cost society because it increases our overall healthcare costs, which all of us pay for.
Right. What are blackouts?
A blackout is when a person actually loses consciousness from being that impaired that they go unconscious. And the problem with that is there's also a huge lapse in memory.
Oh, okay.
So, for example, someone who routinely drinks large amounts of alcohol in time will likely have these memory blocks that they can't account for.
Okay, sort of like a dementia type thing, or
well, I mean, dementia is its own. They have some amnesia, if you will, as to what happened. So, for example, they may have a person who drinks at home and drinks heavily at home because that's how they drink. Because, as I mentioned, not everybody goes to bars, and again, if you drink at home, no one's going to see you probably. So you can again fly under the radar.
And because it's my secret.
And because it's my secret, and oftentimes it is that secret. But generally, what happens is that when people are with all these other diseases, and a blackout is just part of that.
Okay.
It's a short period of unconsciousness, and the brain just can't. The brain is a very delicate instrument, and so the patient or the person may be drinking heavily the night before, and then come down in the next morning and say, and look around and say, where did all this stuff come from? Why are all the movies out? Or how did all this stuff get knocked over?
Okay. Or wake up in bed with somebody
wait-
that they don't realize.
Well, I can't speak to that because I don't.
On TV,
I know.
anything
Well,
can happen.
well, that's true. That's TV, darling. But no, I mean, there's in a blackout, a true blackout is something that really should be investigated because people can. One of the other risks of that alcoholics face is not only blackouts, but they have a risk of bleeding in their brain.
Oh, okay.
And so, is that mental lapse in memory or in judgment? Did something else happen? Could they have had maybe a little mini stroke? Could they have, I mean, one of the things that we always did, if a person died who had an alcohol history, the medical examiner's office would always do an autopsy on that person.
Right.
And we would do that to make sure that they didn't have a bleed in their brain or
like a stroke or something.
Stroke. Well, or an
Aneurysm
active bleed or an aneurysm or something like that, because alcoholics tend to fall a lot.
Right.
And the difference is that when we talk about, especially in the medical examiner realm, it's important that we certify deaths appropriately. And so, if the person fell and had a brain bleed, then that would be an accident.
Right.
If they died from any other symptoms, it would be considered natural.
Okay.
So, we do that to make sure that the families get the right information based on that.
For insurances and for peace of mind.
For peace of mind.
Yeah.
Peace of mind. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about alcoholism, alcoholics, and suicide that happens.
Actually, by percentage, the national suicide rate among alcoholics is around 29-30%. And it does make sense, because if there are underlying psychiatric issues, alcohol only temporizes those.
Okay.
It's kind of a short fix, but it also makes them worse.
Okay.
And so the rate of suicide continues to climb nationally. It's actually down a little bit for teens right now, but it's rising in small increments for the elderly.
Okay.
Because when you think about our elders who may have lost, like I said earlier, lost their spouse, and they need a reason to get up every morning.
Right.
And if their family is all over the country and they're not close by, that can have a profound effect. But there's also a fairly strong link between alcoholism and suicide. So, in some of the deaths that I've investigated, alcohol did play a role.
Is it because how do I want to say, the person loses their inhibitions and makes them more how do I want to say, fearless?
Yeah. It may, and then, but conversely, I would just say, and there's no real necessary pattern, because, as suicide is just as individual as anything else in life. But there is a correlation between alcohol, but there are alcoholics who are stone sober when they commit they commit suicide.
Okay.
So, but there is a significant correlation between that, and that's the third. A third of alcoholics commit suicide. So.
Okay. So, some people, let me just go here. Some people choose rehab and others don't. Is it sort of like with like going on a diet or stopping smoking? You've got to be ready to do it, or
you absolutely have to be ready.
Can some of these people be forced to do it? I mean, you really can't force somebody to do something unless you tie them down and. Right.
And well, to give you an example of how the Belleville retreat works, as with many, generally speaking, people aren't dragged away to rehab if they're alcoholic. It's something that they really need to do themselves. Sometimes they do it for other reasons. Sometimes they may do it. Maybe they're really not ready, but they may be doing it for a loved one or a spouse or a family. Or, but generally speaking, there's usually a loss of one or many things that push people over the edge. And sometimes it might be something, one of those things might be losing their loved one. You know, maybe their spouse or their significant other just says, you know what, this isn't working anymore. You know, your drinking has impacted our lives so negatively that, that you need to go. It can be also for health reasons. People actually, you know, when they go through the physical aspects of withdrawal, it also, the problem with alcohol also is it makes their pre-existing conditions worse. So let me give you an example. Person has high blood pressure, they have hypertension, and they go to their doctor, and they've been on 6 or 8 different medications, and the doc can't quite figure out why nothing's getting better.
Right, right.
It may be an alcohol problem. The same thing is true with cholesterol. Alcohol raises people's cholesterol, and because again, it's part of the liver, and the liver's things get all screwed up. And so, you know, high cholesterol that isn't being responsive to normal anti-cholesterol type medications can also kind of point to. So we need to be asking those people the question, the honest question. Right. The loss of a loss of job, loss of money, freedom, getting picked up for a DUI or some other thing, or committing a crime to pay for the alcohol. Someone losing the status, their overall status, whether it be a job or whether it be something in their community, losing friends. So sometimes some people need to lose kind of all those things before it pushes them. But rehab is really, you know, the illness itself is very individual, and although the symptoms and some of the processes that people go through are pretty consistent and can be pretty well mapped out. People do things for different reasons. So,
let's talk for a few minutes about different resources that are available. I know I mentioned Turning Point, and you've mentioned, you know, like different health providers and families and stuff. What else is out there? I know the Brattleboro Retreat is there.
The retreat is there. The Rutland Regional Hospital has an inpatient process. Up until recently, North Adams did. SVMC had one, had a unit at our hospital for a number of years, and we haven't had for. So we're doing most of patients that come into the hospital. If they come in through the emergency department, they're being seen by United Counseling Service. And the same thing is true. We have our social workers also see our inpatients. The hospital is really not a rehab facility. It's really not the ideal place to be. So our goal is to get the patient through the hump, if you will, through those first few days medically, and supporting them not only with support, but pharmacologically and medications and those types of things. And then the hope is to get them transferred to a rehab facility. And because of the relapse rates that we talked about, sometimes this is a process that patients go through multiple times. The one danger of relapsing, though, and rehabbing, withdrawing, and detoxing over and over is that every withdrawal period, every detox period gets more difficult, is harder. So the symptoms generally get worse with every withdrawal, with every true withdrawal. But there are a lot of resources that are out there that we've already covered, especially those in town. All you need to do is the viewer would just have to get on the internet or contact your physician. And there's tons and tons of resources that are out there.
Good. So would you like to just take a minute and summarize, because I see that we're coming down to the end of our time, and this has been a delightful. I don't want to say happy, delightful, but it's been so informative, in bringing up a lot of things, like I said, I didn't realize, and I'm sure many of our viewers didn't realize that some of this went on too. So can you sort of summarize?
Sure. I think first is that the first thing that people need to realize is that alcoholism is is a medical condition. It is a difficult disease. There is a hereditary component to it, and that there's help out there for people who are struggling and suffering. There is clearly an area of denial that we've talked about with some patients, and that's in persons, and that's very normal. But there are when people are ready to have the conversation, there are a lot of resources out there that people can go to. And I guess the overall question I would ask is, if alcohol is affecting your job, your relationship, your friends, then maybe you have a problem with alcohol. And there's always, the time is always now to look into that, because the situation will get worse.
Right.
And I hope that anyone out there that is struggling with that, I would absolutely be more than happy to see if I could help that person if they wanted to call me through the hospital, and from an outreach standpoint, and try to point them in the right direction. I'd be more than happy to do that.
And even with students and teenagers, I know that I used to be a youth minister at a local church, and I provided speakers like Gary Town had come in one time from the Bennington Police Department, had brought the goggles, the glasses for the different stages of what it was. Yes. And, and Gary and I always ran with the same premise that if you were a teenager in trouble and you were having difficulties with drugs or with drinking and alcoholism, and you couldn't deal with a teacher or with a parent, maybe it was okay to go to see Gary or a police officer or to contact me. So if you feel you can't talk with someone, there's always people that you can talk with, and sometimes if it's a stranger, it's better than somebody you know, because they can speak more honestly with you.
Well, it can be. And one of the other pieces of information I think that is important, that 1 in 6 people will bring up their alcohol use to their physician when they go and do for their annual physical. Interestingly enough, that 92% of people will speak honestly with their physician, and only their physician. And when I have this conversation with the nurses at the hospital, and not only the hospital but in the medical practices of which we own, sometimes the person may not have the same relationship with even the staff nurse that they have with their physician. And because there is that doctor, and not that there isn't confidentiality throughout the whole system, but sometimes I think people relate, the patient, especially if they're in trouble, will relate better to their own physician and be honest with them. So I found the research was very interesting, that if the patient will only bring it up 1 in 6 occurrences, but well over 90% if the doctor brings it up. So. Wow. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. So, well, I'd like to thank Drew for being here today and sharing
Happy to be
his thoughts and his wisdom on alcoholism with us. And I'm Darlene Young, Outreach Coordinator here at CAT TV, and you can reach me at 442-8868. And if you need to speak with Drew, or if you want to grab Drew and have him come to a nonprofit meeting or another meeting, you can get a hold of him. Your telephone number at the
you
hospital?
Can get me at the hospital. Is probably your best avenue, which would be 802-447-5193, and I'd be more than happy to talk to you.
Very good. And Drew will be back with more programs for us here at CAT TV, and we encourage you to keep watching CAT TV. Thanks very much for being with us today. Bye.